Okay, so we have Jove sending Kylenius, which is Mercury or Hermes, down to the Carthaginians, their queen Dido, that they should accept the Trojans in. And so they do, but Aeneas doesn't know this yet. And so he is wandering around the area trying to find out exactly where they are. And he's with his buddy Achates, and all the other Trojans are left behind when suddenly he and Achates see this huntress, this beautiful goddess-looking woman who's dressed like a huntress. And so he's not sure whether she's human or not. And she says, "Oh no, I'm not a goddess. I would never say I am. But I can tell you where you are. You are in Carthage. You're near Carthage, and it's a Tyrian colony, and it's ruled by Dido, by Phoenician Dido. And I'll kind of tell you quickly her story," she says. And so in Tyre, Dido was married to this man Zacchaeus, and Dido's brother was king, her brother Pygmalion. And so Zacchaeus was very rich and madly in love with Dido. They had a great marriage, and Pygmalion, Dido's brother, got jealous of Zacchaeus' wealth. And so one night, in a very sacrilegious kind of way, he kills her husband, Zacchaeus, on the altar to the gods. And so she is devastated, but she doesn't know what's going on. And then eventually Zacchaeus' ghost appears and tells her what's happened. He says, "You got to get out of here. I'll tell you where my treasure is that I hid, and you got to leave your crazy tyrant brother." And so she's afraid for her life, and she does. She gets everything together, including her husband's treasures, and they leave and they end up in Carthage. And so they start building up Carthage, and then Venus says, "So who are you? Tell me about who you are." And Aeneas is about to answer. Line 511. To whom with sorrow streaming from his eyes and deeply sighing, thus her son replies: "Could you with patience hear, or I relate, O nymph, the tedious annals of our fate? Through such a train of woes if I should run, the day would sooner than the tale be done. From ancient Troy by force expelled we came, if you by chance have heard the Trojan name. On various seas by various tempests tossed, at length we landed on your Libyan coast. The good Aeneas am I called, a name while fortune favored, not unknown to fame. My household gods, companions of my woes, with pious care I rescued from our foes. To fruitful Italy my course was bent, and from the King of Heaven is my descent. With twice 10 sail I crossed the Phrygian sea. Fate and my mother goddess led my way. Scarce 7, the thin remainders of my fleet, from storms preserved within your harbor meet." So that's where they had 20 ships, and now they're down to 7 because of what they've been through. "Myself distressed, in exile and unknown, debarred from Europe and from Asia thrown, in Libyan deserts wander thus alone. His tender parent could no longer bear, but interposing sought to soothe his care. Whoever you are, not unbeloved by heaven, since on our friendly shore your ships are driven, have courage. To the gods permit the rest, and to the queen expose your just request. Now take this earnest of success, for more, your scattered fleet is joined upon the shore. The winds are changed, your friends from danger free, or I renounce my skill in augury. 12 swans behold in beauty's order move, and stoop with closing pinions from above, whom late the bird of Jove had driven along, and through the clouds pursued the scattering throng. Now all united in a goodly team, they skim the ground and seek the quiet stream. As they with joy returning clap their wings, and ride the circuit of the skies in rings. Not otherwise your ships and every friend already hold the port, or with swift sails descend. No more advice is needful, but pursue the path before you and the town in view." Thus having said, she turned, and made appear her neck refulgent and dishevelled hair, which flowing from her shoulders reached the ground, and widely spread ambrosial scents around. In length of train descends her sweeping gown, and by her graceful walk the queen of love is known. The prince pursued the parting deity with words like these: "Ha! Whither do you fly, unkind and cruel, to deceive your son in borrowed shapes, and his embrace to shun? Never to bless my sight but thus unknown, and still to speak in accents not your own." Against the goddess these complaints he made, but took the path, and her commands obeyed. So Aeneas is saying, man, if I told you everything about who I am and where I'm from, it would take way too long. We don't have enough time in the day for me to tell you everything. So suffice it to say, I'm Aeneas. I'm a Trojan. We've been all over the sea and the world, and we had 20 ships, and now we're down to 7, and here we are. And he's clearly heartbroken, and so his mother's heart swells and with tender care, and she says, "Whoever you are, just have hope, because I'm skilled in augury. I can read the birds and the signs from the gods." And there's these 12 swans that were flying, and they were attacked by Jove's bird, which would be an eagle, and they were all scattered, but now they're coming together and they're landing quietly. And so your friends are like the swans that were scattered by the gods, and they're all coming together to peacefully land here, so have hope. And then she turns, and all of a sudden she looks like a goddess. I mean, she's beautiful, her hair is long, the ambrosial scent gives off this goddess-like kind of effect. And so, you know, this is Aeneas's mom. And so, where are you going? Why don't you give me a hug? Why don't you stick around? You pretended you were someone else. Why can't you just be my mom? And then she leaves, and we have the ending of that section. Against the goddess these complaints he made, but took the path, and her commands obeyed. So he's upset that he didn't know it was his mom, and he doesn't understand why she can't just be his mom. But he's still going to do what she says. 570. They march, obscure, for Venus kindly shrouds with mists their persons, and involves in clouds, that thus unseen their passage none might say, or forced to tell the causes of their way. So if you remember, this happened in the Iliad sometimes, where the gods would whisk somebody away in a cloud, kind of nebulous thing, and that's what's happening. Venus is shrouding Achates and Aeneas in a cloud so nobody can see them, and ask, "Hey, who are you? What are you doing here?" This part performed, the goddess flies sublime to visit Paphos in her native clime, where garlands ever green and ever fair with vows are offered and with solemn prayer. 100 altars in her temple smoke, 1,000 bleeding hearts her power invoke. They climb the next ascent, and looking down, now at a nearer distance view the town. The prince with wonder sees the stately towers, with late were huts and shepherds' homely bowers, the gates and streets, and hears from every part the noise and busy concourse of the mart. The toiling Tyrians on each other call to ply their labor. Some extend the wall, some build the citadel. The brawny throng or dig or push unwieldy stones along. Some for their dwellings choose a spot of ground, which first designed with ditches they surround. Some laws ordain, and some attend the choice of holy senates and elect by voice. Here some design a mole, while others there lay deep foundations for a theatre. From marble quarries mighty columns hew, for ornaments of scenes and future view. Such is their toil, and such their busy pains, as exercise the bees in flowery plains, when winter past and summer scarce begun, invites them forth to labor in the sun. Some lead their youth abroad, while some condense their liquid store, and some in cells dispense. Some at the gate stand ready to receive the golden burthen, and their friends relieve, all with united force, combined to drive the lazy drones from the laborious hive. With envy stung, they view each other's needs, the fragrant work with diligence proceeds. Thrice happy you, whose walls already rise, Aeneas said, and viewed with lifted eyes their lofty towers. Then, entering at the gates, concealed in clouds prodigious to relate, he mixed unmarked among the busy throng. Borne by the tide and passed unseen along, full in the center of the town there stood, thick set with trees, a venerable wood. The Tyrians, landing near this holy ground, and digging here, a prosperous omen found. From under earth a courser's head they drew, their growth and future fortune to foreshew. This faded sign their foundress Juno gave, of a soil fruitful and a people brave. So Aeneas, disguised in this cloud, goes through Carthage, and everyone's busy doing something to build up the town of Carthage, performing this task, and Virgil compares them to bees, and they're all doing their job, and they're buzzing like a beehive, all working together to make this happen. And then Aeneas goes unseen, strange to relate, prodigious to relate, that nobody sees him, and so he's able to see all of his stuff, and at one point he comes across this holy site where upon arriving the Tyrians discovered this courser's head buried in the ground, and they thought, wow, this is a sign from Juno that this place, this soil is fruitful, and we will be a brave, powerful people. 624. Sidonian Dido here with solemn state did Juno's temple build and consecrate, enriched with gifts and with a golden shrine, but more the goddess made the place divine. On brazen steps the marble threshold rose, and brazen plates the cedar beams enclose. The rafters are with brazen coverings crowned, the lofty doors on brazen hinges sound. What first Aeneas this place beheld, revived his courage, and his fear expelled. For while expecting there the queen, he raised his wondering eyes, and round the temple gazed, admired the fortune of the rising town, the striving artists and their art's renown. He saw in order painted on the wall, whatever did unhappy Troy befall. The wars that fame around the world had blown, all to the life and every leader known. There Agamemnon, Priam here he spies, and fierce Achilles, who both kings defies. He stopped, and weeping said, O friend, even here the monuments of Trojan woes appear. Our known disasters fill even foreign lands. So there, where old unhappy Priam stands, even the mute walls relate the warrior's fame, and Trojan griefs the Tyrians' pity claim. He said, his tears a ready passage find, devouring what he saw so well designed, and with an empty picture fed his mind. For there he saw the fainting Grecians yield, and here the trembling Trojans quit the field, pursued by fierce Achilles through the plain, on his high chariot driving o'er the slain. The tents of Rhesus next his grief renew, by their white sails betrayed to nightly view, and wakeful Diomed, whose cruel sword the sentry slew, nor spared their slumbering lord. Then took the fiery steeds, ere yet the food of Troy they taste or drink the Xanthian flood. Elsewhere he saw where Troilus defied Achilles, and unequal combat tried. Then where the boy disarmed with loosened reins was by his horses hurried o'er the plains, hung by the neck and hair, and dragged around. The hostile spear yet sticking in his wound, with tracks of blood inscribed the dusty ground. Meantime, the Trojan dames, oppressed with woe, to Pallas' fane in long procession go, in hopes to reconcile their heavenly foe. They weep, they beat their breasts, they rend their hair, and rich embroidered vest for presents bear. But the stern goddess stands unmoved with prayer. Thrice round the Trojan walls Achilles drew the corpse of Hector, whom in fight he slew. Here Priam sues, and there for sums of gold the lifeless body of his son is sold. So sad an object, and so well expressed, drew sighs and groans from the grieved hero's breast, to see the figure of his lifeless friend, and his old sire his helpless hand extend. Himself he saw amidst the Grecian train, mixed in the bloody battle on the plain, and swarthy Memnon in his arms he knew, his pompous ensigns and his Indian crew. Penthesilea there, with haughty grace, leads to the wars an Amazonian race. In their right hands a pointed dart they wield, the left forward sustains the lunar shield. Athwart her breast a golden belt she throws, amidst the press alone provokes 1,000 foes. and dares her maiden arms to manly force oppose. Thus while the Trojan prince employs his eyes fixed on the walls with wonder and surprise, the beauteous Dido, with a numerous train and pomp of guards, ascends the sacred fane. So we have Aeneas going to the center of the town, and there's this temple where Dido has built upon the horse's head that they found buried, and the temple's beautiful, and then all of a sudden he looks, and it's a mural of the Trojan War. And so he's recognizing all of these characters, and if you read through this a little carefully, you can remember a lot of these things happening from reading the Iliad. And so he's touched, he's grieved, he's moved, he's crying and groaning. And as he kind of finishes looking at this, all of a sudden Dido shows up on the scene. And she has all this entourage with her, and she ascends the sacred fane, the sacred shrine to Juno here. Such on Eurotas' bank, or Cynthus' height, Diana seems, and so she charms the sight, when in the dance the graceful goddess leads the choir of nymphs, and overtops their heads. Known by her quiver and her lofty mien, she walks majestic, and she looks their queen. Latona sees her shine above the rest, and feeds with secret joy her silent breast. Such Dido was, with such becoming state amidst the crowd, she walks serenely great. Their labor to her future sway she speeds, and passing with a gracious glance proceeds. Then mounts the throne, high placed before the shrine. In crowds around, the swarming people join. She takes petitions and dispenses laws, hears and determines every private cause. Their tasks in equal portions she divides, and where unequal, there by lots decides. Another way by chance Aeneas bends his eyes, and unsuspecting, sees his friends. Antheus, Sergestus grave, Cloanthus strong, and at their backs a mighty Trojan throng, whom late the tempest on the billows tossed, and widely scattered on another coast. The prince unseen, surprised with wonder, stands, and longs with joyful haste to join their hands. But doubtful of the wished event he stays, and from the hollow cloud his friends surveys, impatient till they're told their present state, and where they left their ships, and what their fate, and why they came, and what was their request. For these were sent, commissioned by the rest, to sue for leave to land their sickly men, and gained admission to the gracious queen. Entering with cries, they filled the holy fane. Then thus, with lowly voice, Ilioneus began. O Queen, indulge by favor of the gods to found an empire in these new abodes, to build a town with statues to restrain the wild inhabitants beneath thy reign. We wretched Trojans, tossed on every shore from sea to sea, thy clemency implore. Forbid the fires our shipping to deface. Receive the unhappy fugitives to grace, and spare the remnant of a pious race. We come not with design of wasteful prey, to drive the country, force the swains away. Nor such our strength, nor such is our desire. The vanquished dare not to such thoughts aspire. A land there is, Hesperia named of old. The soil is fruitful, and the men are bold. The Oenotrians held it once by common fame, now called Italia, from the leader's name. To that sweet region was our voyage bent, when winds and every warring element disturbed our course, and far from sight of land cast our torn vessels on the moving sand. The sea came on, the south with mighty roar dispersed and dashed the rest upon the rocky shore. Those few you see escape the storm, and fear unless you interpose a shipwreck here. What men, what monsters, what inhuman race, what laws, what barbarous customs of the place shut up a desert shore to drowning men, and drive us to the cruel seas again. If our hard fortune no compassion draws, nor hospitable rights, nor human laws, the gods are just, and will revenge our cause. Aeneas was our prince, a juster lord or nobler warrior never drew a sword, observant of the right, religious of his word. If yet he lives and draws this vital air, nor we, his friends, of safety shall despair, nor you, great queen, these offices repent, which he will equal and perhaps augment. We want not cities, nor Sicilian coasts, where King Acestes' Trojan lineage boasts. Permit our ships a shelter on your shores, refitted from your woods with planks and oars, that if our prince be safe, we may renew our destined course, and Italy pursue. But if, O best of men, the fates ordain that thou art swallowed in the Libyan main, and if our young Iulius be no more, dismiss our navy from your friendly shore, that we to good Acestes may return, and with our friends our common losses mourn. Thus spoke Ilioneus. The Trojan crew with cries and clamors his requests renew. The modest queen awhile with downcast eyes pondered the speech, then briefly thus replies. Okay, so Dido comes on the scene. She's doing leaderly stuff. She's settling disputes. She's giving orders. She's being a queen. And then these lost Trojans, and Aeneas recognized them as the ones he thought were dead, and they come to the queen and say, hey, why haven't you helped us yet? We're coming here for refuge. We've been buffeted by all these storms, and it would be so cruel of you to turn us back. Do the right thing. The gods are watching, and they will get revenge if you don't. Please let us fix our ships. We are hoping our leader Aeneas is alive still, and if not, then we'll just go back to where we came from in Sicily, and we'll mourn our losses there. And so now Dido is going to reply. Line 790. Trojans, dismiss your fears. My cruel fate and doubts attending an unsettled state force me to guard my coast from foreign foes. Who has not heard the story of your woes, the name and fortune of your native place, the fame and valor of the Phrygian race? We Tyrians are not so devoid of sense, nor so remote from Phoebus' influence. Whether to Latian shores your course is bent, or driven by tempests from your first intent, you seek the good Acestes' government. Your men shall be received, your fleet repaired, and sail with ships of convoy for your guard. Or would you stay, and join your friendly powers to raise and to defend the Tyrian towers? My wealth, my city, and myself are yours. And would to heaven the storm you felt would bring on Carthaginian coast your wandering king. My people shall, by my command, explore the ports and creeks of every winding shore, and towns and wilds and shady woods, in quest of so renowned and so desired a guest. Raised in his mind, the Trojan hero stood, and longed to break from his ambient cloud. Aeneas found it, and thus urged his way. From whence, O goddess born, this long delay? What more can you desire? Your welcome shore, your fleet in safety, and your friends secure? One only once, and him we saw in vain oppose the storm, and swallowed in the main. Orontes in his fate our forfeit paid. The rest agrees with what your mother said. So Aeneas is like, hey, Aeneas, this is it. We have our passage. Queen Dido just said, hey, yeah, you guys, you know what? I have to defend my shores because we're building a new city here. We're kind of vulnerable, so we have to just be extra careful. But everyone's heard of you Trojans. And yes, of course, no matter where you came from or where you're going, you have our blessing and our help. You guys are our renowned guests, and I can only hope that your king shows up as well. And so, hey, ding, 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 Aeneas, that's your cue. And what's he waiting for? Well, here we go, 822. Scarce had he spoken when the cloud gave way. The mists flew upward and dissolved in day. The Trojan chief appeared in open sight. August in visage and serenely bright, his mother goddess with her hands divine had formed his curling locks and made his temples shine, and given his rolling eyes a sparkling grace, and breathed the youthful vigor on his face, like polished ivory, beauteous to behold, or Parian marble when encased in gold. Man, so he appears out of nowhere, and he is looking good. Venus makes sure of it. Thus radiant from the circling cloud he broke, and thus with manly modesty he spoke. He whom you seek am I. By tempests tossed and saved from shipwreck on your Libyan coast, presenting, gracious queen, before your throne a prince that owes his life to you alone. Fair majesty, the refuge and redress of those whom fate pursues and once oppress, you who your pious offices employ to save the relics of abandoned Troy. Receive the shipwrecked on your friendly shore, with hospitable rites relieve the poor. Associate in your town a wandering train, and strangers in your palace entertain. What thanks can wretched fugitives return, who scattered through the world in exile mourn? The gods, if gods to goodness are inclined, if acts of mercy touch their heavenly mind, and more than all the gods, your generous heart, conscious of worth, requite its own desert. In you this age is happy, and this earth, and parents more than mortal gave you birth. While rolling rivers into seas shall run, and round the space of heaven the radiant sun, while trees the mountain tops with shade supply, your honor, name, and praise shall never die. Whate'er abode my fortune has assigned, your image shall be present in my mind. Thus having said, he turned with pious haste, and joyful his expecting friends embraced. With his right hand Ilioneus was graced, Serestus with his left, then to his breast Cloanthus and the noble Gaius pressed, and so by turns descended to the rest. The Tyrian queen stood fixed upon his face, pleased with his motions, ravished with his grace, admired his fortunes, more admired the man. Then recollected stood, and thus began. What fate, O goddess born? What angry powers have cast you shipwrecked on our barren shores? Are you the great Aeneas, known to fame, who from celestial seed your lineage claim? The same Aeneas whom fair Venus bore to famed Anchises on the Idaean shore? It calls into my mind, though then a child, when Teucer came from Salamis exiled, and sought my father's aid to be restored. My father Belus then with fire and sword invaded Cyprus, made the region bare, and conquering finished the successful war. From him the Trojan siege I understood, the Grecian chiefs, and your illustrious blood. Your foe himself the Dardan valor praised, and his own ancestry from Trojans raised. Enter, my noble guest, and you shall find, if not a costly welcome, yet a kind. For I myself, like you, have been distressed, till heaven afforded me this place of rest. Like you, an alien in a land unknown, I learned to pity woes so like my own. She said, and to the palace led her guest, then offered incense, and proclaimed a feast. So boom, Aeneas comes up out of nowhere, he's gorgeous, and he says, you are wonderful, and thank you so much. Your generosity is just such a blessing, and I will never forget you, and may you be blessed all your days. And then he quickly stops and goes to embrace his men that he thought were dead. And we get this little detail here that the Tyrian, line 866, the Tyrian queen stood fixed upon his face. She was pleased with his motions and ravished with his grace, and admired his fortunes, but more admired Aeneas. Man, he is awesome. And then she says, are you really Aeneas? I've heard of you. My father's friend Teucer came, and he told me all about you, and man, I just can't believe you're here, and that the gods have brought you to me, and man, we are just so similar, don't you think? And then they're going to have a feast. So moving on, nor yet less careful for her absent friends, twice 10 fat oxen to the ship she sends, besides 100 boars, 100 lambs, with bleating cries attend their milky dams, and jars of generous wine in spacious bowls she gives to cheer the sailors' drooping souls. Now purple hangings clothe the palace walls, and sumptuous feasts are made in splendid halls. On Tyrian carpets richly wrought they dine, with loads of massy plate the sideboards shine, and antique vases all of gold embossed, the gold itself inferior to the cost. Of curious work, where on the sides were seen the fights and figures of illustrious men, from their first founder to this present queen. The good Aeneas, paternal care, Iulius' absence could no longer bear, dispatched Aeneas to the ships in haste, to give a glad relation of the past, and fraught with precious gifts to bring the boy snatched from the ruins of unhappy Troy, a robe of tissue stiff with golden wire, an upper vest once Helen's rich attire, from Argos by the famed adulteress brought, with golden flowers and winding foliage wrought, her mother Leda's present, when she came to ruin Troy and set the world on flame. The scepter Priam's eldest daughter bore, Her orient necklace and the crown she bore, of double texture, glorious to behold, one order set with gems and one with gold. Instructed thus, the wise Aeneid goes, and in his diligence his duty shows. But Venus, anxious for her son's affairs, new counsels tries, and new designs prepares. So great, yeah. Dido is welcoming her guests. They have a great feast with wine and lambs and all of this stuff. But then Aeneas, the good Aeneas, has paternal care for his son, Iulius. And so he calls for his son. He sends Achates to the ships to get his son. And he says, while you're at it, have him bring all of these wonderful treasures that we have as gifts for Dido. And then we get line 927. But Venus. And so if you read the Bible, you'll hear all of these verses that have but God. And what follows but God is something glorious. We were all dying and destined for hell, but God in his mercy, and so on. So but God is a wonderful phrase, and here we have but Venus. You can think of the Iliad. But Aphrodite. So great. Something wonderful is surely about to happen. 929. That Cupid should assume the shape and face of sweet Ascanius, and the sprightly grace, should bring the presents in her nephew's stead. Nephew here actually means grandson, so instead of Iulius will be Cupid. And in Eliza's vein, that's another name for Dido, the gentle poison shed. For much she feared the Tyrians, double-tongued, and knew the town to Juno's care belonged. These thoughts by night her golden slumbers broke, and thus alarmed to winged love she spoke. My son, my strength, whose mighty power alone controls the thunderer on his awful throne, to thee thy much-afflicted mother flies, and on thy succor and thy faith relies. Thou know'st, my son, how Jove's revengeful wife by force and fraud attempts thy brother's life, and often hast thou mourned with me his pains. Him Dido now with blandishment detains, but I suspect the town where Juno reigns. For this it is needful to prevent her art, and fire with love the proud Phoenician's heart. A love so violent, so strong, so sure, as neither age can change nor art can cure. How this may be performed, now take my mind. Ascanius by his father is designed to come with presents laden from the port to gratify the queen and gain the court. I mean to plunge the boy in pleasing sleep, and ravished in Idalian bowers to keep, or high Cythera, that the sweet deceit may pass unseen, and none prevent the cheat. Take thou his form and shape, I beg the grace, but only for a night's revolving space. Thyself a boy, assume a boy's dissembled face, that when amidst the fervor of the feast the Tyrian hugs and fawns thee on her breast, and with sweet kisses in her arms constrains, thou mayst infuse thy venom in her veins. The god of love obeys, and sets aside his bow and quiver, and his plumy pride. He walks Iulius in his mother's sight, and in this sweet resemblance takes delight. The goddess then to young Ascanius flies, and in a pleasing slumber seals his eyes. Lulled in her lap, amidst a train of love, she gently bears him to her blissful groves. Then with a wreath of myrtle crowns his head, and softly lays him on a flowery bed. Cupid meantime assumed his form and face, following Achates with a shorter pace, and brought the gifts. The queen already sate amidst the Trojan lords in shining state, high on a golden bed. Her princely guest was next her side, in order sate the rest. Then canisters with bread are heaped on high, the attendants water for their hands supply, and having washed with silken towels dry. Next 50 handmaids in long order bore the censers, and with fumes the gods adore. Then youths and virgins twice as many join to place the dishes and to serve the wine. The Tyrian train, admitted to the feast, approach, and on the painted couches rest. All on the Trojan gifts with wonder gaze, but view the beauteous boy with more amaze, his rosy-colored cheeks, his radiant eyes, his motions, voice, and shape, and all the gods' disguise. nor pass unpraised the vest and veil divine, which wandering foliage and rich flowers entwine. But far above the rest, the royal dame, already doomed to love's disastrous flame, with eyes insatiate and tumultuous joy, beholds the presence and admires the boy. The guileful god about the hero long with children's play and false embraces hung. Then sought the queen, she took him to her arms with greedy pleasure, and devoured his charms. Unhappy Dido, little thought what guessed how dire a god she drew so near her breast. But he, not mindless of his mother's prayer, works in the pliant bosom of the fair, and moulds her heart anew, and blots her former care. The dead is to the living love resigned, and all Aeneas enters in her mind. All right, so but Venus comes up with this plan. Ascanius is to come with all the treasures and come to Aeneas, and Venus's plan is that Cupid should impersonate him. And so they've set this plan in motion, and instead of Ascanius comes Cupid. We have this scene where Venus kind of puts Ascanius to sleep, and he's in blissful sleep, and that allows Cupid to kind of take on the appearance of Ascanius, and he comes in, and he has all these treasures, and everyone thinks, wow, Ascanius is such a good-looking little boy, and look at these treasures, they are all impressed, and especially Dido. And so as Cupid, pretending to be Ascanius, runs around and plays, he eventually gets to Dido's lap, and she's just enamored with him. And boy, oh boy, that poison starts to spread through her veins, and all of her former cares she's forgetting about, all of the tragedy of her history, her husband dying, and so on. And all Aeneas enters in her mind, so that's all she starts to think about is Aeneas. So the plan is working. Line 1011. Now when the rage of hunger was appeased, the meat removed, and every guest was pleased, the golden bowls with sparkling wine are crowned, and through the palace cheerful cries resound. From gilded roofs depending lamps display nocturnal beams that emulate the day. A golden bowl that shone with gems divine, the queen commanded to be crowned with wine, the bowl that Belus used, and all the Tyrian line. Then silence through the hall proclaimed, she spoke. O hospitable Jove, we thus invoke with solemn rites thy sacred name and power. Bless to both nations this auspicious hour. So may the Trojan and the Tyrian line in lasting concord from this day combine. Thou, Bacchus, god of joys and friendly cheer, and gracious Juno, both be present here. And you, my lords of Tyre, your vows address to heaven with mine to ratify the peace. The goblet then she took with nectar crowned, sprinkling the first libations on the ground, and raised it to her mouth with sober grace. Then sipping offered to the next in place. It was Bitias whom she called, a thirsty soul. He took challenge and embraced the bowl, with pleasure swilled the gold, nor ceased to draw, till he the bottom of the brimmer saw. The goblet goes around. Iopus brought his golden lyre, and sung what ancient Atlas taught, the various labors of the wandering moon, and whence proceed the eclipses of the sun, the original of men and beasts, and whence the rains arise, and fires their warmth dispense, and fixed and erring stars dispose their influence. What shakes the solid earth? What cause delays the summer nights and shortens winter days? With peals of shouts the Tyrians praise the song. Those peals are echoed by the Trojan throng. The unhappy queen with talk prolonged the night, and drank large draughts of love with vast delight. Of Priam much inquired, of Hector more, then asked what arms the swarthy Memnon wore, what troops he landed on the Trojan shore. The steeds of Diomed varied the discourse, and fierce Achilles with his matchless force, at length, as fate and her ill stars required, to hear the series of the war desired. Relate at large, my godlike guest, she said, the Grecian stratagems, the town betrayed, the fatal issue of so long a war. Your flight, your wanderings, and your woes declare. For since on every sea, on every coast, your men have been distressed, your navy tossed, 7 times the sun has either tropic viewed, the winter banished, and the spring renewed. So we get to the end of book 1, and we have Dido giving wine especially to all of her guests and filling it up, and it's kind of like a drinking frenzy, just a celebration. Bacchus is invoked, and he's the god of wine. And so people are drinking, and then someone comes out with his lyre and sings a song, Iopus, and it's all about Atlas and the world, the moon, the stars, the sun, and the seasons, and all of this. It's a song that delights the Tyrians and the Trojan. And then the queen decides to prolong the night by asking Aeneas about the Trojan War, about Priam and Hector and Memnon and Diomedes and Achilles. And she asks at the end here in 1058, relate at large, my godlike guest, the Grecian stratagems the town betrayed. So tell us how the war ended, what stratagems the Greeks used, and what happened since you have left. It's been 7 years since the end of the Trojan War, so tell us what's been happening in that time. And that is the end of book 1.